Welcome to Startup Stories, where we go behind the scenes of some of the most interesting and innovative tech startups in the world. Each episode will bring you in-depth interviews with entrepreneurs and business leaders sharing their personal stories on success, failure, and everything in between. So whether you're an entrepreneur yourself or someone that's just generally interested in the world of startups, then Startup Stories is the perfect place for you to gain insight and inspiration into some of the most exciting players in the game. So sit back, relax, and join us on a journey of startup stories. Hey Christian.
Hey Jordan, how are you?
Very good, thank you. Great to have you on the Startup Stories podcast. I've had a little look into your profile and I want the listeners here to actually know who you are. So if you don't mind giving yourself a quick introduction, that would be great.
Sure. My name is Christian. I'm one of the founders of Impossible Cloud. Before Impossible Cloud, I had a number of roles in startups. We can dive into that. I started my career as a scientist. So I studied and did a PhD in neuroscience, postdoc in computational neuroscience. And then switched into the startup world, had roles at Groupon, Airbnb, own startups, and then some stints in the gaming industry with Good Game, a role at Stillfront. Then I did a little detour into AI, and now I'm here doing Impossible Cloud. So by all means, I'm happy to go into all of these things, but that's the sort of thing condensed in one sentence.
Yeah, we'll dive into that in a little while. What I want to do is I want to understand who Christian really is. And the best way to do that is I want to understand you from your earliest possible context. So take me back to your childhood. Tell me what life was like for you.
Okay, so childhood is an interesting, of course. So in my childhood, I think when I look back, also in the context of like where I am right now, both of my parents were always working in their own professions. My dad was a doctor, my mom was a physiotherapist, and they had their own practices, and they were always working, always self-employed. On the weekend there was like office work. So I think in hindsight this was pretty strong role model. I didn't of course take it understand it as a role model when I grew up, but like now in hindsight I think it was quite it's still there, like this always on, always working, always being your own boss kind of thing. That was something that was there all through my childhood, and as a result I also had a lot of free time. I personally actually think that it's quite important that children have a lot of free time. Like it's kind of important to get to a point where as a child you get really bored. Because only then you start being really creative and make up these stories in your mind or build things in the forest or whatever, all of these super creative things. So many of my fondest childhood memories are actually born out of being alone at home. Like my brother was 6 years older, so he was often kind of too he wouldn't want to play with me, I don't know, in the garden or in the forest or something. So I always had to do things on my own and make up these like worlds.
Love that. And you talked about your parents, your father being a doctor and your mum being a physiotherapist, self-employed, working all the time. So as a child, we all know that you learn from what you see and you reenact what your parents do and stuff like that. But was there, out of the two parents, did any of them have a particular impact on you?
I mean, both. My dad, he was not very much at home, and like the family wasn't necessarily like what you would call a happy family. Like when I was a teenager, my parents finally divorced, and kind of like before that, had a long stint of like possibly not being at home so much. My dad, and so for a long time in my life, I had this kind of chip on my shoulder, like wanting to show my dad, like because he was never there, he was never proud of me, kind of like that's how I felt. And so I had this chip on my shoulder, and I think in hindsight, that's one of the reasons I actually did this, that I launched into this science career. I was always interested in science, and I launched into this science career to be able to have a doctor title myself, and really show him, look what I can do. And my mom, my mom was very was always there. She was very loving, and like I think overall my mom had the larger influence on me. So yeah, I guess that answers your question.
Do you think you've made your dad proud now?
Oh, for sure. Like at some point in my life, I managed to just let go of all this anger and all these bad feelings, and just like, I don't know, said, okay, enough is enough. Now it's okay. And I think also as you grow older, you understand that life is complex, and it's not quite always so black and white as one sees it as a teenager. So I think nowadays I understand like him and like his life a lot better than I did when I was, 15.
Well, it sounds like you did the right thing about it. You channeled your energy into, being progressive with your life. I mean, I've done my research on you, and to me, it doesn't even look like you had a normal job, or according to LinkedIn anyway. You started a company during your PhD, right?
Yeah. So at some point during my PhD, or actually I think it's like a friend of mine kind of came up with this calculation of like his lifetime earning, his lifetime's net earning in the job that he was doing, like with a reasonable career development and so on and so forth. And it came out at like just shy of 2 million or something. And I was like, man, that's so low. Because I kind of looked at these houses, and like, I don't know, one of these houses were like, I don't know how was so much more than these 2 million. And then if this is his net earnings for the entire lifetime. So I did my own calculation. It was similarly kind of like a little bit deflated, and then said, okay, look, what do I do to improve the situation? Only science is probably not the way forward. Even though I loved science, I loved being a PhD, doing my PhD, I loved doing my postdocs, and I still think that is a very valid career, a valuable career. Anyway, so so then I started my first company during my PhD, just as a side project, like a moonshine business, as they call it. In hindsight, it wasn't very professional at all, but it did help me. Together with the education to land a role with Oliver Samba, pretty much, straight after my postdoc, and I got promoted from Oliver before I even started there. It was really interesting. So, Oliver Samba, he's this like fabled character in at least German startup land, and what he did more than possibly anybody else I know is he gave people huge tasks, and then of course checked up on them, but just gave them huge responsibilities straight away. The same was true for me. I got a job with Rocket Internet, but before I even started that job, I was promoted to a managing director role at a local Groupon constituency in Australia, and this managing director title was not necessarily kind of like floated. It was not said, yeah, you're the director and so on and so forth. It was like, yeah, you go and start the company there. And only once we were there and we figured out, okay, we have to call ourselves the directors here, otherwise we can't hire people. We don't have no authority. So we had to figure it out ourselves, and of course in like on a CV, in hindsight, it looks so easy. It looks, oh, look, he's the managing director. But, the reality was he just hired teams of really capable people and let these teams figure out extremely huge tasks themselves. And I think that's a really good thing. And that's something, for example, we also try here at Impossible Cloud, really giving people huge problems, difficult problems, and having them own it. I think that really fulfilling and delivering a task gives you this extreme feeling of like satisfaction and happiness, much more than, I don't know, having lots of tiny tasks that you work off, and I don't know, your little world, and you feel like a wheel in a big machinery. Like, I think it's awesome to have these like big tasks that you own and you fulfill, and then you're like, oh wow, I'm really proud of having delivered this.
Yeah, and ultimately you're giving your employees ownership and freedom by the sounds of it, which is from my experience being a recruiter myself, when I deal with clients, is the companies that retain the people for the longest tend to be the companies that hire people for that reason, not to tell them what to do, but to let them show them what they need to be doing in order to do their tasks. That's what they've been hired for. So I like that approach. Was that essentially what you were saying?
As well, yes. It creates its own problems, by the way.
Of course.
If you like, I tend to hire not into boxes, but I tend to hire individuals and try to let them work in their fields of strength where they really feel strongest. But of course, if you do that, every hire changes every other demand in hiring. So you hire someone that's really good at, I don't know, Web3 technology, but you hire that person into your backend engineering team. So you're like, okay, well, now I basically have to change the demands of that Web3 engineer role that I had in mind, because this person can already do lots of this task. So I have to change the role, and then it has to be always kind of flexible to fit that puzzle together. So it comes with its own challenges, but I think ultimately it's much better this way.
And I looked more into your profile and I see that you've actually got 87 endorsements for startups. So startups seems to be in your blood. What is it about startups that just gets you excited?
Well, for starters, I started quite a lot. So I started the first one during my PhD, a dating thing. I wish I would have come up with Tinder. That would have been, back then it was like an online to offline concept. And then I did the roles at Groupon and Airbnb. Then I started my second company, this time already venture backed, A Space for Art it was called. Then that didn't work out, unfortunately. So then I did roles at Good Game and Stillfront. Then I joined my third startup. Well, I bought into the company, so it was kind of like, at least again, partially mine. But before I even started there, the pandemic started, and then I changed the dynamics completely. And now I started my fourth startup with Impossible Cloud. So yeah, I think you can see why there's maybe so many endorsements for startups there, because I spend a lot of time in startups, building them myself, building other people's startups, joining startups, and so on and so forth. So to be honest, I can't even imagine working in a corporate job. Like my time at Stillfront, as a Nasdaq listed company, I was the chief commercial officer, was very different, and it was super experience and super interesting to do that. Being in a Nasdaq listed, public listed company, and but startup is my thing. I like it a lot better. There's this challenge to get from 0 to 1, from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3, and so on and so forth is awesome. Yeah,
I think I share the same views as you. So tell me about, where did the idea for Impossible Cloud come from then?
So with Impossible Cloud, we did a lot of research and essentially came up with this idea that there is a gap in the market for sort of to reshape the internet. So what we really want to do is we want to bridge the gap between Web 2 businesses that want to be in the cloud, that are in the cloud already, and Web 3 technology. In a nutshell, we looked at the market and we're like, wow, cloud is amazing. And then even every subsector in the cloud and every subsector of every niche in the cloud is still huge. It is huge, but then it's nearly every sector is dominated by the same companies, namely the AWSs, Azures, and GCPs of this world. Their services are super expensive. Like at Good Game, Stillfront, we must have spent hundreds of millions alone in cloud services from these companies. It's so extreme what you spend on these services. When you really look into it, you're like, well, that original promise from, I don't know, a decade ago of like, oh, all this on-prem cost and stuff, it will go away when you go into the cloud. Nowadays, it's kind of the other way around. In Silicon Valley for at least a few years, there's this talk about the AWS tax. So it's like it completely turned around. Like cloud is no longer something that is cost effective and makes things easier, but like it's super complex, let alone the pricing model of something as simple as storage on Amazon fills tons of pages, with lots of asterisks, like here this extra model, and here's another tier, and here's another pricing model here and there. It's incredible. So looking at that, it's ripe for disruption. This industry is super pricey. It's like come to a point where it's like, okay, they're clearly milking a cash cow there. All of these businesses, by the way, are using these cash cows to support other aspects of their giant businesses. In Amazon's case, it's really obvious what they're doing, So yeah, you see that, okay, it's ripe for disruption, and you see the disruption is already happening. So the disruption with decentralized cloud, decentralized Web3 based cloud offerings is already happening, but somehow they are not really taking off in a significant way. Not saying that like a company like Filecore and Protocol Labs is not successful or something, hugely successful, but on the scale of the cloud, they're not a big player yet. And we looked into why is this, and we believe it's because there's so much friction for businesses to use it. So that's why we said, okay, let's bridge that gap between that disruptive technology and what enterprises, what business customers really need and want. They don't want any of this friction. They don't want to own wallets. They don't want to have a discussion with their finance department about the ability to buy tokens or these kind of things. What we've done is we just reimagined cloud storage with a Web3 technology backing and bringing that to a mass market, the mass market that cloud industry already is.
How long did you spend doing the research before you actually launched the company?
To be honest, Kai and myself, we've been looking at business models for quite a while, analyzing quite a wide range of business models, and never really fully kind of like at the trigger point of like, let's commit. With this one, we did in-depth research for about sort of 3 or 4 months before we said, okay, this is what we want to do. And then we found Daniel as a co-founder for exactly this business, where his experience was like just so perfect for exactly what we want to do. And that's when things got really going, and we started hiring the first people and so on and so forth.
So many people, I would say, have business ideas. Not everybody actually turns them into a reality. So I always like to know, you spent this time doing research. Yes, you've got a good credibility from your previous work and stuff like that. But what made you think, you know what, this is a really good idea. I'm actually going to turn it into a reality now?
To be honest, like you don't know upfront. And in our case, we didn't even get that confirmation that the idea was good from investors, because we self-invested at the beginning. Given our backgrounds, we have enough financial backing ourselves to do like essentially the pre-seed round. So we did that ourselves. So we didn't get that external validation then, and no one. You get like people telling you, yeah, this is an awesome idea and so on and so forth, but you never really know. And I think in hindsight, I'm kind of happy that I didn't know many of the intricacies within this market and within these technologies that I know now. It's good to have a certain naivete at the beginning, and then to learn as you go. Generally, I think timing is everything, and what we saw with this particular idea, bridging the gap between Web2 businesses and Web3 technology, is that the timing seems perfect right now. So so timing, like you can have the best idea, you can have the best team. If the timing isn't right, it's going to be really difficult to do anything about it. So I think one thing that gave us a lot of conviction is that the timing seems perfect.
Yeah, and you just got to go with what's right at the time, right? You can't, even if it's not right, you've still got to try regardless, because it is, as you say, fortunate that it was the right time. But at the same time, as you know, from an entrepreneurial point of view, there never is quite the right time. Certain people, I'm speaking to the audience here, because some people are like, oh, when should I start my business? Maybe 6 months time or next year. There never really is a right time. You just got to do it and see what happens.
Just as a follow-up to what you just said, or what you asked before, why did you do it? The other reason we did it, Kai and myself, and Daniel, same thing, is we love how big the opportunity is.
Yeah.
So, in our case, our case is slightly different to many founders, and it's very different to how I started my first business or even my second business. With this business, we already had tremendous success. Good Game Studios, in the time that we were there, still had more than $1 billion turnover. Over the years, counted all together, summed it all up, it's more than $1 billion turnover. And Stillfront, where I was in the C-level, Kai was in the board. At its peak of the share price, the market cap was, I think, exceeding $3 billion. So it's tremendous success there in the past. So for us, it was also a big motivator to be able to do something that really has the opportunity to become huge, to influence the future, to do something that's bigger than anything we've ever done, to kind of really shape the world. It's not a niche business that, you can maybe or make a bit profitable or something, but it really is kind of furthering humanity, reshaping the way of the internet, in the beginning, and still now we're saying, let's reinvent the internet. That's kind of what we're doing. And to us, this is a big motivator. Every morning I get up and this is so cool. I can work on something that's beyond what I ever dreamt of in terms of what is achievable.
Yeah, and that's just pure fulfillment and purpose. It sounds great what you're doing, and I can actually say I can vouch for what you were saying about Good Games, because I've been doing the German market from a recruitment point of view for the last 9 years. So I've actually seen Good Games do what they've done. I've seen them many times, of course, from Hamburg, and how much they've grown. Are they still going today?
Yes, of course. Good Game is still part of Stillfront. I think it's one of the more successful studios within the Stillfront umbrella. And it's still going. It's from here, from where I stand right now, it's less than two miles down the road. There's the Good Game offices. We still have many friends there, and have some ties, but no professional ties anymore. No longer working there. But just of course each other, and I don't know. My dentist is still right next to the Good Game office, and so on and so forth.
So Impossible Cloud, you were founded in 2021, is that right?
2021, we founded the company, yes.
So fast forward to now, in the early stages of 2023, I just noticed that you've had your seed round of 7 million euros last month. So talk to me about where you're at right now from when the idea, the company started in 2021.
When we started, we had just the vision of let's bridge this gap, let's do it, let's somehow. Now it's a lot further. Now we have really a much more detailed roadmap of how we want to do it, how we want to get there, what is the product roadmap, and so on and so forth. We just 2 weeks ago put the general availability of our object storage offering live. So pretty much anyone, and especially any company, can sign up to our object storage offering. We support all the major functionalities: versioning, object lock, programmatic IAM, like a reseller backend, anything that you are used to from, say, the AWS S3s. And AWS S3 is not just a product; they also coined an API standard, so we are S3 compatible, as it's called. So it's a bit like Tesa in the German market. It's not just a brand, but it's a type of thing. S3 compatibility. It's pretty amazing. So that's great. So that's our first foundational offering. It's a foundational service storage. It's not a cloud storage is not something exciting new or something, but we have to make it different. But what's exciting about it is where are we going from here, and the possibilities of offering additional cloud services on top of storage. So kind of storage plus or auxiliary things to storage, and then additional cloud services that build on top of storage are pretty limitless. So it's now just a matter of prioritization of what other services are demanded and what we are building next.
So tell me, what's been the best part of your journey so far with Impossible Cloud?
So the best part of our journey, I think one of the best moments so far was when the funding round finally closed. So that was a huge relief. It gave us this endorsement from really some of the biggest names in the VC world at a time where, it wasn't very easy to raise money, actually. So when we started back in 2021, it was so easy to raise money, especially with our backgrounds and Kai being the former founder of Good Game Studios. Good Game Studios is super successful. Kai and myself as a team, and then later on, once Daniel started, the three of us as a team, super strong team. People were just basically saying, "Shut up and take my money." But then we didn't want it. We were self-funded. It's not that we had hired so many people, so we were like, okay, let's just do this with our own money. Let's figure it out, and then we'll raise money when we're ready. But then, of course, in 2022, the market turned entirely, and all around us, the warning signs kind of went on. And by the time we were ready to actually do our own funding round, pretty much every VC was super interested in talking to us. At the same time, many of them in the first conversations were like, well, look, guys, this is just about building a relationship. Right now, we're not doing any new investments. We're only investing in our portfolio companies, extending their runways and so on and so forth. We're not doing any new investments. And I'm like, okay, this is different. Very different to a year before. When really it was, it would have been so easy to get money then. But fast forward, of course, we found the right type of investors. We even had an oversubscribed round. Once it became clear that we had 2 lead investors with HV Capital and 1KX, then so many others were pouring in and saying we want in. So then the sort of dynamic turned from oh, it's so difficult to, oh wow, what do we do now? This is a luxury problem, and that was just fantastic. And then just pushing that through to the end, signing the documents at the notary and then walking out thinking, cool, we've done this. 3.5 months or something it took us from the very first conversation to actually doing the notary signing. We were I think that was so far the highlight of this journey. And from now on, I hope that the highlights are much more sort of product focused, client focused, reaching revenue milestones, reaching product milestones, and so on. So it was a great feeling, for example, 2 weeks ago when we pushed the button and were generally available, and we're like, okay, crazy, now anyone in the world can start storing data with us. And sure enough, you've got that you come back to your dashboard the next day, and there's some strange user using a backup solution that we've never ever heard about before, to back up gigabytes and later by now terabytes of data onto our system. We're like, awesome, this is completely awesome. So that's also a pretty good moment.
So now that you've got this funding, what does this mean for Impossible Cloud? What are you now able to do that you perhaps was holding you back before getting the funding?
Now we can really focus on building that bridge, building that decentralized cloud that we so far have been talking a lot about, and of course we have the beginnings of, and really start disrupting the other cloud players. And eventually, right now what we're doing is, of course, we're starting to build revenue, we're starting to get clients, and eventually we're aiming for some A round in 2024, and then really round by round we'll work our ways into really truly disrupting that cloud space.
How big is Impossible Cloud now in terms of your headcount?
We are, I think, 22 employees, a few more new starters in the next months, and I think 1 or 2 freelancers. And
what's the long-term ambition? You say you want Impossible Cloud to be this next big thing. How far do you want to take the company? What's the ambitions?
Well, we want to reinvent the internet. You don't do that with 25 people only. So I think there's quite ambitious hiring plans. So for sure, with the seed funding that we have right now, I don't think we can if you do the math, you can't hire hundreds of people. So it's step by step. I always like to think in plans, in kind of dimensional planning, from a small to a medium to a slightly bigger and so on and so forth. So where do we want to take this? Yeah, I mean, at Good Game Studios we had at one point more than 1,000 employees. I don't shy away from that, or even 10,000 or more. But it's not about the employee count. It's about the sort of what these people are able to do. And I think as we grow and as we conquer vertical by vertical, offer a rollout sort of cloud services on top of storage and then auxiliary to storage and so on and so forth. Yeah, there's so much to do. There's a world to conquer there, and I hope that we can find many people that join us over time to also fulfill that mission and that vision of really building a European cloud company that is different and is disrupting all those staple US cloud names that we all got used to.
What would you say is the most important part of a business, or a startup, should we say, to have a successful startup? What with you being someone that's been in a lot of startups?
I would say one of the most important kind of things I always tend to tell people is try again. No one asks you ever how often you failed. So look back at the last 35 minutes. You did not ask me how often you failed. I even told you that I failed a few times, but you didn't sort of kind of go into it and dug around the pain of my one of my early companies not working or something. So and the same goes I learned this lesson, by the way, in science already. In science, what you do at a certain level is you apply for funding. So I applied for funding for my PhD. I applied for funding for my postdoc. You apply for funding all the time, and I got so many rejections. It was unbelievable, so many rejections. But no one ever asks you about how many rejections you got. People always ask you or are only interested in the one thing that you eventually got. So I think that's something that is a really important lesson, and it's a really important thing to remember when you build a startup, or in general. Success doesn't come doesn't just come and you do one thing and that's it. But there is underneath that kind of success is a lot of failures, a lot of long hours, a lot of hard work, a lot of I don't know, fears and I won't make it and all of these kind of things. And the interesting thing is people are generally not necessarily asking about these things. They only see the success and then judge you by that. That's okay. But it's an important lesson as you build a company, as you persist, try again, try again.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I actually was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast yesterday, and he said success is like loads of layers of paint. So you keep painting left to right. It's so minuscule, but over time, let's say he was trying to make a success of this podcast. After 200 to 300 episodes, maybe then that's when it goes as big as it can be. But it takes time, and it's the same concept with business. Like you just said, you have to keep trying, keep failing, keep trying, keep failing. And over time, those layers of paint will end up stacking up high enough one day.
That's it. And if you make yourself that, if you make that clear to yourselves, I think I try to do it all the time. Sometimes I succeed better, sometimes I succeed less. But if you remember that success is built on taking risks, on failing, on having self-doubts, on taking a lot of criticism for anything that you do, on being able to sacrifice and having to sacrifice things, on, late nights or weekend work and blah, 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 then it's easier to take all these things because you know that they're ultimately paying into succeeding at the end. So I think it makes it easier and it makes it more acceptable to do all these things and to then try again and fail. It makes it easier to accept that I have that concept in mind. This is all on the way to actually making it.
What's your biggest challenge right now?
Biggest challenge right now. So many challenges. Biggest challenge right now. This is a very personal podcast, so I'll answer in that personal style. One of the things that I find quite incredible is that as a founder, anything that you always say is taken so serious. It's not possible to just be part or to just listen in so you always have that always on mentality. You always have that I have to enable people. They all look at me. There's always that pressure to do the right thing all the time. I find that quite challenging. It's also exhilarating. I kind of love it as well. It's a big challenge, and it's something that is even stronger in this business than I experienced it before. And it's different as a founder than it is as a manager. So I had these roles at Groupon, Airbnb, and so on and so forth. I was the manager director, local founder, or whatever they called it. That was cool, but I was still an employee. Same at Good Game or Stillfront. I was still employed, and it's different when the company is yours and there is no boss. You are the ultimate decider, and everybody looks at you all the time to decide. So that's a big big responsibility. It's fun, but it's also challenging.
Yeah, but it looks like from your resume you can clearly take the weight of that on your shoulders.
Well, you
best you can.
I like it. I mean, I wouldn't do it if I wouldn't like it. At the same time, of course, as I said, like it's challenging, but I like it, and it's fulfilling. Sometimes you do good things and you're like, it's cool.
Well, Christian, many would say, you've achieved so much in your career. You've obviously done very well for yourself. Many would say you could sort of ride off into the sunset now and chill and enjoy the calmer life. But so tell me, what still to this day gets you out of bed in the morning? Why, after everything you've achieved, do you still feel like you want to get out there and do such a thing?
Well, first of all, I did that. So, after buying into that AI company and then the pandemic, and it really didn't work out at all, and I got out of it with a blue eye kind of thing. Then I did travel for nearly a year. And then fulfilled myself some dreams, like doing a skipper license and all of these kind of like wonderful things. And to be honest, I just came to the point where I wrote down some of the goals in my life. Maybe you know that book, A Big Five for Life. It's quite an interesting kind of little book.
No, I've not heard of that.
It's a fun book. I recommend reading it. It's not the Bible or whatever, but it's a fun book. And the concept is you write down your big five for life. And one of these big five for life for me was like founding a company and really launching it to become something really big. And once I realized this is one of the big achievements in my life that I really want to achieve, aside from being a great dad or spending lots of time traveling, all of these kind of like more regular things. Once you realize this is something that really drives you, this gives me all the motivation, to do all the things that I talked about, like the hard work, the getting up in the morning, the whatever it is, because I'm fulfilling my own dream and following my own goals, and that's it's a big realization that at some point you have, and you're like, okay, this is actually what I want to achieve with my life, and I need to do to achieve this. I need to do what it takes to be able to achieve it.
I've just noted that down. Big five for life. That sounds like a really interesting concept. And I have to say, from a selfish point of view, this is part of the reason why I do this podcast, because hearing you talk so passionately about what you're doing with Impossible Cloud and your entire career, it's inspirational for me. Being a founder of my own company, I'm obviously nowhere near what you've achieved, but it just inspires me to want to do more. And I'm sure the listeners, it will either generally resonate and they can relate to it, or it will inspire them to maybe challenge themselves or do something different. So I appreciate that. So lastly, I always like to end on what is the most important lesson that you've learned throughout your career?
I think I'll stick with that. No, nobody ever asks for how often you got rejected. It's one of the more important lessons for my life. Mm-hmm. Apart from that, I think I personally think it's very important to accept that you have to love what you do, and you do what you love. And it sounds a bit sort of cheesy, but at some point, I think I realized I need to get over this idea of like there's always something else, and there might be something else that's better, or something is this. There's always this kind of feeling in our society, that FOMO, like something else might be better, or I want to be somewhere else, and I think that's all a bit sort of crap. It's really about accepting what you do is exactly the right thing at the right time, and just giving in and loving what you do and doing what you love is to me is very important. And finally, as you do that, I think it also instills a sense of sort of gratefulness in yourself, towards the world, towards your own abilities, towards being able to do that, and that again then leads to a bit of satisfaction in yourself, like deep own rooted satisfaction that you can really rest in yourself, and you're like, okay, it's good. I do what I like. I'm grateful to be able to do what I like. I love what I'm doing. All of these kind of things I think are important kind of realizations that help you overcome the many, many, many distractions that this world has to offer, and there are many FOMOs that one could have, and just let you live a much more satisfied and better, more fulfilled life and really reach the goals that you set out to reach.
I have to say, I completely agree with you there. One of my favorite quotes is, "Comparison is the thief of joy."
That's true.
Which is very true. Well, Christian, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the Startup Stories podcast. Thank you for your time, and speak to you very soon.
Speak soon, Jordan. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Startup Stories. I hope you enjoyed hearing from our guests and learning more about their journey in the startup world. I'll be back soon with another exciting episode featuring a new guest, so make sure to subscribe to Startup Stories so you never miss an episode. Also, don't forget to follow me on social media for updates and additional content. And if you have any suggestions for guests or topics you'd like to hear about, please reach out to me. And as always, I appreciate your support and feedback. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.